όλες και όλους που είστε σήμερα εδώ. Είναι μεγάλη μας χαρά και τιμή που συμμετέχουμε και φέτος στο Φεστιβάλ Μετάφρασης της Διεθνής Έκθεσης Βιβλίου Θεσσαλονίκης.
It's a great honor and pleasure to participate in the book fair, and it is a great pleasure to have two colleagues, Dr. Olga Castro, who is representing the Warwick University as well as the Barcelona University, and our own Vasiliki Miskiou from the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki.
Today it's a great honor, a great pleasure, and we can't wait to listen to what you have to say to us. Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you all for being here today. We would also like to express our heartfelt thanks to PEMPIP, the Pan-Hellenic Association of Professional Translators, graduates of the Ionian University, our very own Cleopatra Elotriviari, and all members of this amazing team who made this event happen, and of course to Nopi Hadzioriou, coordinator of the Thessaloniki International Book Fair. I am Vasiliki Miskiou, as Cleopatra just mentioned. I'm assistant professor in the Department of Translation and Intercultural Studies at Aristotle University of Thessaloniki, School of English. My research areas are gender, feminism and translation, literary translation, theater translation, paratext and translation, and semiotics and translation. This is where I stop. Please allow me to introduce you Dr. Olga Castro. She's a distinguished senior research fellow at the Autonomous University in Barcelona, Spain, while she's on academic leave from the University of Warwick in the UK, where she's reader, something higher compared to associate professor, in translation and transcultural studies. Her main research areas are feminist translation studies, as well as translation and publishing in the Anglophone American book market, and she's co-founder and editor-in-chief of the journal Feminist Translation Studies, where I'm also assistant editor. So this is who we are, and I think it's time to start, okay? So, Olga, one of the key themes of this book fair this year is women in books. However, when thinking about a title for our conversation, we had no doubt we wanted to discuss feminism and translation in the publishing industry and not simply women. Perhaps we could start by discussing the title of this talk.
Yeah, so why feminism and not simply women? For me, for us, using the term feminism makes explicit that our interest lies in discussing how gender relations are structured in the publishing and the translation industry, and also in revealing the ways in which women writers have been and still are systematically discriminated against. But there is a huge diversity of experiences that women writers have, which is why adopting an intersectional approach, an intersectional feminist approach, is crucial. We need to pay attention to differences and to power inequalities within the social group women writers. So it depends on the languages they write in, the literary system they belong to, their their race, their social status, their class, etc. So what is clear is that some women will have it much easier than others when it comes to accessing the literary world.
I agree. I suppose the main reason is that feminism is a political term, and we want to put an emphasis on how political activism can help dismantle power relations in the publishing industry and change the world. So this is why we opted for feminism and not women in translation. Okay, now you have been researching the field of feminism, literary translation and publishing for more than 15 years now, yeah? Since you entered the field, have you observed any shift in the role of feminism and translation within the wider cultural conversation about literature?
So I suppose it depends on which literatures we consider. it's not possible to make a universal statement about feminism and literary translation. We have to answer this question from a very specific situated position, so framing it in a specific context. And because the context that I've been studying for a long time is the Anglophone literary market, I will stick to this context to answer this question. And the answer is absolutely. There has been a shift, a big shift. And in recent times, we've seen a growing presence of feminist perspectives in wider discussions about translated literature, especially fiction and poetry, not so much drama in the UK, I would say. And nowadays it's quite common to see panels and discussions organized about women writers in translation at major literary events and book fairs, like the panel here today. And all of this is great, but at the same time, it has some risks, I would say. It risks leading to an essentialist understanding of women's literature, as if what women write is something specific in opposition to men's literature, which would be like the norm, like, you know, universal literature. So that's a risk. And I would argue that the ideal situation, now that we have made the issue, the problem visible, the ideal situation would be that discussions about gender and feminism and women in translation and about other inequalities as well in the publishing industry are part of general discussion, so that the feminist perspective is integrated in the discussion at all levels.
This is interesting. So, the two literary spaces you have focused on so far, at least, are the English language publishing industry, known also as... A bit closer. Okay, thank you. Also known as the Anglosphere, and translation and publishing in Spain, especially in relation to literatures. To literatures in minority and co-official languages like Basque, Catalan, and Galician. I would like to ask you some questions. First, about the English language book market. Okay. How would you describe the translation publishing industry in the Anglosphere when approached from a feminist perspective, and more specifically, what's the position women have in it?
I'm gonna borrow, yeah, because it's gonna work, right? Yeah, great. So I'll start with a brief consideration about the position of translation in the publishing industry in general. And it's clear that there is an asymmetry defining translation flows in the global literary map, so in the literary world map. Most of the literature in the world gets translated from English into other languages, and only a small part of what is translated has English as the target language, so into English. That's a very small part. And for years, studies quantifying the percentage of translated books in the English market agreed that it was around 3%. So you can see on the slide this 3% problem. And there is a website that started quantifying how many books were translations in the English book market. So there was no tradition to read literature in translation. And then when the VIDA account started, and the VIDA account, what does is to analyze from a gender perspective the number of women in the literary arts. So when they started carrying out gender analysis of the presence of women in translation, they concluded that the percentage of foreign women in English translation was 25%. So 25 out of 3%. So nothing. However, recent reports, like the ones I had in the previous slide, so more recent studies and reports, show that 3% is growing steadily. It's being overcome. And interestingly, and being in mainland Europe, it's something I wanted to say, there is a connection perhaps between this interest in reading translation and Brexit. So it seems that some Britons needed to feel closer to Europe through literature, and there is more interest in translation. Those reports also note that the increase in translated literature in the UK is linked to the emergence of small and independent presses, which are really the pioneers for translation. And actually, if we have a look at the shortlisting books for the International Booker Prize for the last few years, so I've got a screenshot here from 2019, but it's been the same trend since then. We will see that the immense majority of books shortlisted were published by small publishers. So they are the ones leading the translation market. And yeah, I'm showing you screenshots from The Guardian to make a point as well about translation being part of mainstream debates and public opinion as well. So the main newspaper in Britain is talking constantly about translation into English and how important it is to keep translating. So all this interest in translation has meant that the number of books currently, or the proportion of books currently translated is about 7%. But what is really important here is that those translated books sell really, really well. So 7% of translation and 22% of sales. I've included a quote from this piece of news from The Guardian, and you can see it maybe on the screen, although it's not that big. I'll read it. So the most recent figures show that the sales of translated fiction, and I'm talking about fiction only, not poetry, drama, but fiction, increased 22% last year compared to 2021. And also very interesting, it's most popular among young readers below 35. So they are the ones reading. Now, how about women and women writers? So the position of women has also improved. In absolute terms, if we look at the figures, we can see that in 10 years, between 2008 and 2017, women writers, the books by women writers went from 94 to 218. But men's books were also showing a similar trend, which means that proportionally, it hasn't increased so much. So yes, in absolute terms, but it's increased a little bit in terms of the proportion. And this is thanks to a lot of initiatives that were put in place in the last few years in the UK and the States.
Okay, this was really interesting, Olga. So you mentioned recent activism in the UK in recent years about translation in general and about translating women more specifically. Could you tell us more about specific initiatives in place and what kind of foreign women writers are being translated into English?
Yeah, so to make it easier for the audience to get to know all these initiatives, I've included screenshots on the slides as well. I'll say the names, but if you're interested, you can go online and check later on, because all this activism is happening online. So there have been quite a few initiatives. I'm not going to mention all of them, but I would say that it all started around 10 years ago, when many started talking about the GWIT movement, GWIT like Women in Translation movement. So 2014, 10 years ago, the Women in Translation Month was announced. And this was an initiative by Mejtal Radzinski, who is very, very active in social media. So it was a blog and also a Twitter account. And so one day she said, okay, it's going to be Women in Translation Month. Publishers, if you have published Women in Translation, get in touch, and I will retweet everything you do. So it soon became like a marketing tool for publishers, which was not the initial idea, but nevertheless, it gave visibility to women who had already been translated into English. The well-known translator Susan Bernovsky said also that year, 2014, we need a prize for women in translation. And that happened 3 years later. That was the Warwick Prize for Women in Translation, 2017. That, the prize is for the best for the best book published in the UK or Ireland in English translation, a book by a woman author, but it can be translated by a man, a woman, a non-binary person, it doesn't matter. And they published the long list of books and also the short list, creating like a very interesting catalog if you want to read what's new in translation. So you go to the catalog and you can see what really deserves to be read, let's say. And the name of entries have been increasing every year, year after year. We also have the Women in Translation Tumblr, which is an excellent resource to get data, graphs, information, reflections about what's going on in the publishing market. And this initiative comes from the US, so it's more US focused. But also I wanted to mention the Lit Hub. It's a great initiative to help identify women writers who have not been translated yet. So that's like the previous step. And they publish these posts about 10 books by whatever women we would like to see in English. So German, Latin American, Czech, Slovak, Japanese, nothing about Greek. I checked last night to see if there was something that wasn't, but it's a great resource to see that. And also the Translating Women blog, in which Helen Vasallo was writing reviews about books that had been translated. And just to mention, finally, another important factor here, or initiative. I was mentioning that the small publishers are leading in the translation market right now. And they are also, there are also projects focusing specifically on women. So we've got this small publisher, Eloise, that focuses on both original works in English and also translations. And we have other publishers like 3 Times Rebel, that only publish women in translation. And actually they say 3 Times Rebel because it has to be women from minority languages. So it's like different layers of discrimination that they try to tackle with this initiative. So I suppose with all of these, the point you were asking me about who are the women who are being translated. So I think the point is we can no longer say that, it doesn't make sense to keep asking, are women being translated? Because there are a lot of initiatives that prove they are. The question now is which women are being translated? So which geopolitical, which cultural, which linguistic realities are being represented in English translation? Which literary traditions, which genres they represent? Which identities they represent as well, because it's not only about women, it's women and something else. And also which minority and non-hegemonic languages are translated into English, or even which major languages that are coming from a colonial space. So it's not the same to translate Portuguese books written by Portuguese authors, or Brazilian, or authors from Angola. And the same happens with Spanish, or let's say, Peruvian authors, or even authors from Equatorial Guinea, where Spanish is an official language as well.
So the lack of diversity is still a problem, Olga?
Yeah, I think it is still a problem. So things are being done, but it is still an issue. when I was trying to see figures about Greek authors in English translation, that was very little, comparable to Galician, Basque, not even comparable to Catalan, which is a stateless language, so it's not like the official language of a nation state. So there have been many campaigns led by different literary societies to increase the diversity in literature, and that's working. We can see some progress there. However, when it comes to translation, literary translation, this progress is not that evident yet. And very often the excuse that I hear is that there are not enough translators available in this language pair to do the translation, or well, there isn't more diversity because those diverse authors, whatever that means, were not so well known in the source literary system. So how can we translate them? However, what is really interesting to answer these claims is that we do find translations of male authors who were very, very niche, sometimes like virtually unknown, and still they are translated. They are found and they are considered worth of translation. And on the other side, there are also plenty of women writers who are indeed very well known in their source systems, but when it comes to the gatekeepers of translation, they are not selected for translation. So despite how well known and all the reputation and prestige they've got in the source language, and I think you're going to talk about that later, the Greek authors, they do not cross borders. They remain totally invisible for those making decisions about translation.
Okay, thank you, Olga. So it is common for some countries to put into place different translation grant schemes to promote literary exchanges. Here in Greece, we have the example of Greek Lit that is its aim, to promote Greek literature abroad. Do translation grants play a role in promoting women writers in English translation?
Okay. Translation grants play a big role in promoting translation. Now, women writers in translation, it depends. I'm not so sure. So when I was discussing those reports at the beginning, studying what gets translated into English, those reports specifically say that because those publishers introducing translations are mainly independent small publishers, they do need translation grants. So translation grants are absolutely crucial for them. Without translation grants, the translators couldn't be paid. These publishers are really small. Now, in countries where translation is a big part of the literary market, there are often grants to translate foreign literature into that language, so to import literature. However, that's not the case in the whole of the UK. In Wales and in Scotland, there are some translation grants to translate into Welsh or to translate into, let's say, Scottish English, or to be published by Scottish publishers. But when we think about England, there is no public funding to translate from other languages into English. The only translation grants I'm aware of is the Pen Translates that every year publish a call for proposals. And it's a great initiative, but it's an independent association, and so the resources are quite limited as well. So this is a piece of news when they were announcing the winners of the awards last year in August, and we can see that they could fund 13 translations. So it's really a very low figure, and that's everything in English in England. On the other side, many countries have translation grants to promote their literature abroad. So it's like doing cultural diplomacy through translation. So giving money to foreign publishers so that they publish their literature in translation. And for many of these countries, English is, or translating into English is a priority. Not only because, as I said, it's a great way of doing cultural diplomacy with one of the, well, most powerful languages nowadays, but also because it allows that literature to reach a much wider audience, and English works as a launch pad, so as a stepping stone to access other languages and other markets. Very often agents and scouts read a word in English and then decide if they want to translate it into, let's say, Swedish or Danish or Chinese. But if we think about, so it's important, these grants are important in all cases, but if we think about small literatures specifically, translation grants are crucially important because that's the only way these small literatures have to gain international recognition. So the situation is, in the UK, small publishers need translation grants, and most of what gets translated into English has benefited from these schemes. Not so much the English pen, because they only fund 13 translations, but from money coming from the source cultures, let's say. Now, all this was like a way of framing the answer to the question, do translation grants really play a role in promoting foreign women writers? I would say that yes, but only generally. So there is nothing specific about that. And many countries have legislation nowadays about how governments have to promote equality in every single thing they do. But when it comes to deciding the criteria for awarding these translation grants, gender is not there. So as far as I can tell, the grants I know do not include any, let's say, positive action criteria to bridge the gender gap, to compensate for this historical gender imbalance in translation.
Okay, so translation grants play an important role in the case of promoting small literatures abroad. And your other area of expertise is precisely that of the small literatures of Spain, which are literatures written in languages other than Spanish, Basque, Galician, Catalan. And I would like to know how important is translation for these literatures now? To what extent can translation grant schemes or grants used to promote these literatures abroad can be successful or can be considered successful?
Yeah, so as I said before, translation grants are important for all literatures, but in the case of small literatures, they are absolutely crucial. And in the case of multilingual states, let's say, where languages are co-official and they compete with a hegemonic language, they are even more important. And also, through these translation grants, it's not only about international recognition, but also sometimes about self-esteem. So for these minority literatures, seeing that they are translated into major languages, it creates or it gives some impulse to the collective sense of identity to the literature. But at the end of the day, it's also about getting wider audience. And well, on the map you can see different languages spoken in Spain. So in Spain, 45% of the population live in a bilingual territory, even though only 3 languages have co-official status, which is Galician in red, Basque in purple, and Catalan in yellow. So those are, because they've got co-official status, they are the ones that can be promoted through translation grants. So what happens with authors from these areas is they are bilingual, of course. And if they choose to publish in Basque, in Catalan, and in Galician, they know they won't be able to reach the Spanish audience. So translation is a way, translation into other languages is a way to get that wider audience that they didn't have in the first place. And in fact, sometimes but it's not easy for them to get translated. So many of them resort to self-translation into Spanish, and then sometimes they are translated from Spanish into the other languages, and their identity is completely distorted, and we could be talking about that for ages, but that goes a bit far away from the talk, or the topic of this talk, so I won't go into that. But yeah, I wanted to say that because of this co-official status of these languages, what happens is that there are different institutes or funding bodies, like Greek Lead in Spain. So the Spanish ministry funds translations from any official language. And from this year, just a couple of weeks ago, they announced that Asturian is going to be included as well, which is not official yet, the language. It is official that they are going to include it. And on top of that, there are regional bodies, institutes, or governments that deal with translation grants directly from Galician, from Basque, and from Catalan. There is a specific institute in Catalonia and the Balearic Islands, which is the Institute Ramon Llull, tasked with the promotion of Catalan literature abroad, and they are doing everything right, I would say. Catalan culture was guest of honor in the Frankfurt Book Fair in 2003, and that's when they started preparing, let's say, for like the internationalization of Catalan literature. And in fact, Spain was guest of honor of Frankfurt in 2022. And when I was interviewing officers from the Spanish government, and I asked them, how did you approach it? And they said, well, we just phoned the Catalans and they asked what they did. And they basically tried to reproduce some of the initiatives that work really, really well. So it's, they work closely with the Catalan publishers. They work as a macro-national literary agent. So this institute, they hold meetings with foreign publishers. They study their catalogs. They go and meet with them and they tell them, look, you have to translate this author because it fits so well in what you do. They also promote business meetings, so they invite foreign publishers to go to Barcelona and to meet with local publishers who, of course, are interested in selling translation rights and making money out of it. They've got fellowships for translators who can go to Barcelona for a couple of months to either improve their Catalan or to be immersed in the Catalan culture, to be able to translate better. Of course, the translation grants, but not only for the translation, also grants for, once the book is translated, yeah, I know, I would want to cry. So once the books are translated, they almost automatically give money for the promotion of the book to disseminate it so that it actually reaches the audience, which is basic. And they also fund sample translations, so they are really a very good example to follow. Not because I'm in Barcelona now, but they are really, I've been studying there for a long time, and that's a very, I mean, I would say best practice.
I'm so happy for you, not so happy for us. Okay. I need to be honest, as I say. So, what is the role of women writers now in these literatures? Are there any initiatives in place to promote their translation?
Well, in the three cases, Basque, Catalan, and Galician, women writers are well known. They've got reasonable prestige. They are awarded literary prizes. So they've got the reputation they need to be able to be translated. But they are not always translated. So the Catalans, you can guess why, they are translated much more than the Basques or the Galicians. So I would say it's not a matter of literary quality, it's a matter of all these initiatives that are behind supporting the translation. And things don't work like overnight. The Catalans started working on this 20 years ago, 2004, when Catalan culture was guest of honor in the Frankfurt Book Fair. So things take time. And I was focusing on translation into English, which is one of the most difficult markets to get into because of the low number of translations, although it's a very interesting time now with all this interest after Brexit in European literatures. So we should make the most of it. So just to show you some figures, and I will leave it here, and then we can talk about Greece. With this study that I conducted about translations into English from Galicia, women are in red, so only 3 women out of 30 translations. In the case of Catalan, 32 women writers out of 80 translations. And that was only until 2018, okay? Nowadays, I mean, there are a few more Galician authors, but the Catalans, they are like rocketing. And in fact, last year, a Catalan women writer was shortlisted for the International Booker Prize, which is the most prestigious prize for international literature translated into English. So she was there, Eva Baltasar, in case you know it. So yeah, it's not a matter of literary quality, it's a matter of the support that they have, that there is behind that. So let's talk about Greece now. And you've been researching the Greek scene, the Greek literary market from a gender perspective as well. So what's the position women have in the publishing industry in Greece?
I'm not going to say what you said, okay? Well, I'm afraid this question cannot be answered, actually. For when I reached out to Ms. Mirella Baziana, that is right there, who works at USDEL, the Greek Collecting Society for Literary Works, I was desperate to find out some information on women writers, their production, translations of their work, and so on. She very kindly said to me, and she can confirm since she is here, "Oh, you're looking for information based on gender." I'm afraid that there is no data based on gender, so I cannot help you explore gender-related, gender-based differences in the Greek publishing industry. Of course, I was shocked, and I asked again, what about relevant information, data provided by the Greek publishers, Greek publishing houses? Her answer was once again negative, out of ignorance, I have to admit, and perhaps because I kept refusing to accept the dire reality of the situation in Greece. I asked, how could I, whether I could have access to her database so that I could extract some data with regard to translations. Which women writers were translated in Greek? Which Greek women writers were translated in other languages? Still believing that this information would be easy to locate. Politely enough, she replied, "I'm afraid you don't understand. The database includes," I quote her, "all names of all writers who have been published in Greek, either in translations or in original Greek works." And it was that time that I had to hush, mute myself, apologize for my insistence, and ask her what we could possibly do. And allow me, please, to wholeheartedly thank her, she's there, Ms. Baziana, for she went on to provide me with data regarding the translations produced over the last decade, which we will see in a while. But before that, what did I do? I started compiling a list on my own with names of Greek women writers randomly without applying any criteria. And within less than 5 minutes, I came up with at least 40 names, poets, playwrights, writers. So I keep wondering how many of these works that we will see now here, how many of these works were written, translated by women, which women? Because as we can see, there was a steady rise A steady upward trend until 2019, then a sharp decrease in 2020, and from 2021 a steady rise once again, only to drop again in 2023, representing almost 30% of the production, the 29. And as we see, the Greek work, but I need to mention that, the Greek works also published in 2023 were almost 600 less compared to the ones published in 2022. So that drop witnessed with regard to translations is also relevant when it comes to domestic production. Yet, I keep wondering how many of these works, of these 3,277 translations, were works or include works written by women or were translated by women translators. There is definitely a gender gap there, gap in information about the representation of women in the Greek publishing industry. And I'm afraid it is a gender gap, the result of years and years of ignoring women writers. Women were and still are, and I hope they won't be, invisible, ignored, and or silenced or perhaps dismissed even. And Greek women have been and still are systematically discriminated against. And while doing this research now for the purposes of today's talk, I kept also remembering the words of Vasya Giannakari, our writer and translator, who when she translated Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own, she wrote a note, a translator's note, and there she says, as a woman writer myself, not only a woman translator, I do want to stress and point out that we're still discriminated against. Mm. Something. I'm not going to show this so that we move on. Yeah, these are the publishers and their translations that they produce a number of books in 2023. You see that the first publisher is Dioptra, then Psychogos, Minos, Metechmio, Pataki, Susaeta, the one you saw yesterday, Olga. And then, of course, it's English once again. The books translated in Greek mostly are written in the English language, then French, modern Greek, Spanish, German, and Italian, the first 5 languages. Okay.
Yeah, so there is a clear gender gap in the Greek publishing industry in general, and also in the Greek translation publishing industry, let's say. Are there any initiatives to try and bridge that gap?
Okay, I've only recently found out about Know Her Words. This is a project of PEN International Women Writers Committee that aims, and I quote, this is their aim, to highlight the best women's writing around the world and to compile a canon of women's works. And in this context, all PEN centers, regional centers, PEN Greece, PEN America, PEN UK, PEN Spain, were invited to select and formulate a list which will be periodically renewed and hopefully gradually enriched of the 10 best works written by women writers. And you can see here the 10 best works written by Greek women writers that were selected. What is interesting, there is also there is poetry, there is children's literature, there is an essay, and there is, of course, prose. What is interesting is the committee's reasoning and criteria based on which they selected these 10 words. I'm not going to go into detail, but I'd like just to read a sentence and leave it to you. The Greek publishing production is adorned by quite a few works by women authors that are worthy to be praised. Quite a few. They didn't expect that there would be that many. Aren't they many enough for us to comment on them? I'm not going on.
Right, and we were discussing earlier the importance that translation rights and translation support policies in general have for promoting writers in general in translation, but women writers specifically. And you mentioned Greek Lead. Could you tell us a little bit more about Greek Lead and what they do and well, any success story, perhaps?
Our audience is very interactive, and I keep listening to very interesting ideas and views. We can discuss this later, okay? So, Greek Lit promotes Greek authors through its translation program. This is its aim. The program funds up to 75 of the total cost of the translation. So the original Greek work proposed for translation must have been already published in Greek, in printed form, at the time of application, and its translation needs also to be published by a foreign publishing house able to guarantee that it will be distributed and promoted effectively in the country of publication. This is what Greek Lit asks them to do. The grant applies to all types of books published in Greek, except school textbooks. Recently, a member of the Greek Lit Committee stressed that 39 books have already been published in 19 languages. Okay, does this prove that the strategy applied has been successful so far? Why am I asking this now? First, because there's no information data on the books that have been translated so far. Which books, which writers, let alone women writers, in which languages, when. There is no data whatsoever at all. Also, there are no sample translations that have been produced. These sample translations are not uploaded on the website. I have done at least 5 so far. I'm not there, not even listed as one of the translators. The ecosystem that you see here, I said, wow, ecosystem, let's click, let's see what we will find out. Okay, it doesn't include all writers, translators, illustrators, just a few names. And when you click on those names, you don't get any sort of information regarding the books they have translated within the Greek Lit framework. Nothing. What about cultural diplomacy then, when it comes to Greece? The promotion of Greek literature in translation is not part of it, because I've recently read a report published by the Greek government regarding its cultural policy and soft power, and said, oh yes, this is what I need, yes, let's go, let's read it. And it mentioned cultural policy. And I said, okay, now focus on it. What about its cultural policy, your country's cultural policy? And it said, as part of our cultural policy, the Hellenic Foundation focuses on Greek language learning. And I was, what? Okay. You can get to know about culture, a country's culture, without necessarily being taught its language. What about books? I'll stop here.
I see why some of you were almost crying when I was describing the Catalan Institute. I have to say, I'm from Galicia originally, and the Galician scheme works pretty much like the Greek one. So there are other not so good practices, let's say. I think, yeah. Yeah? No, that's all right, yeah. So I wanted to ask you just to, well, I've got 2 more questions. Do we have time? Quickly. So would you like to tell us something about, I mean, what did you do in this situation? Are there any initiatives to try and promote some writers, women writers?
There was this presentation of this book on Friday, actually, which was very important. When I started compiling this list of women writers, Eleni Priovolo also came to my mind. And then the other 52 women writers that you see, some of whom I had already noted down in my list, who have shared, among other things, short stories in a collective volume called Ifonitis, Her Voice, published by Kastianottis Publications a year ago, in May 2023. All 53 contemporary Greek women writers are members of the network of women writers against gender-based violence and femicide called Ifonitis, Her Voice. You can see the names and book cover here. And they joined a common cause because their wish is to shed light on gender-based violence in its both visible and invisible forms, the patriarchal structures, of course, of oppression and discrimination against women, and the need, and this is important, for solidarity and togetherness, Olga.
Right. And just to conclude, because I see time is pressing now, is there anything else you would like to say? Perhaps, I mean, something which is really important about the promotion of Catalan literature abroad is this synergy between the publishing industry, so publishers, academia, the regional government, and the institutional support. So, anything to conclude?
20 years ago, a Greek writer, Amanda Michalopoulou, who's also part of this initiative, yeah, I know she was. She said, we're waiting for a miracle. Okay, we're still waiting for a miracle, but something that also emerged out of my conversation with Ms. Batsiana is that we need to join forces, this is important, and carry out research together. We need to strengthen the collaboration between institutional bodies, funding bodies, private industry in Greece, academia, university, so that we connect with each other. We interact constantly with each other. And what we also need to do, also following up to your conversation and your talk, Olga, we need to follow the example set by the UK and Spain, mainly our friends Catalans, and follow this example. So we need a strong policy, strategy, and more successful policy making, definitely. So thank you. Is there time for questions or not? No? Oh, no. They said no. No? Yeah. Yes, yes. So thank you all for being here and listening to us. Thank you. Thank you.